Hey guys, so I want to show you how to fill in a unit circle properly where it will help you a lot. It will help you find all the different answers that are to follow. So what you want to do is you want to start by labeling the quadrantal angles, and that's the zero, which is 2 pi value. So this is the 0 to 2 pi, so I'm going to label that first. This one would be then pi over 6. So pi over 6, guys, is equal to 30 degrees. And then we have pi over 4, which is equal to 45 degrees. Pi over 6, which is equal to 60 degrees. Well, actually, it should be pi over 3. Pi over 3, which is equal to 60 degrees. And then we have pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. And then what you want to do is, remember this one is 60 degrees as well, but in the second quadrant when it comes to reference angles. So that would be then pi over 3 as a reference angle, but in order to find out the rotation angle, you take 1 less than the denominator. So instead of it being 3 pi, it'll be 2 pi over 3. So you look at the denominator and you subtract 1 for the top. And that's a little trick to figuring that out. So this would be then the 90. So this would be 180 minus 60 degrees, which is 120 degrees. So that's 120. And then here we know that this would be 180 minus 45 degrees, because 45 degrees would be that middle reference angle. So for 135 degrees, you would go over 4, but then it's 1 less than that number. So 3 pi over 4. And our next one we know is over 6, because that one, I'll just write that this is 135 degrees. This one's going to be 150. So that's going to match that pi over 6 number, and we just want 1 less than that 6, so it's 5 pi over 6. So that's how you fill out the actual radian value. So that's a little quick way to fill out that second quadrant. And then this is pi. So pi is always equal to 180 degrees. Next we continue, and the trick to this is we know that this one's going to be some pi over 6 number. This one's always going to be the pi over 4 number, and this one's going to be pi over 3. So that's what you want to remember. So the one closest to the x-axis should always be pi over 6, then pi over 4, and then pi over 3. So keep those in mind, and that will help you fill out the numbers. So this one, in quadrant 3, you're always going to have 1 more than the denominator. So instead of 6, you have 7. So that's 6 plus 1. Then 4 plus 1 is 5 pi over 4. 3 plus 1 is 4 pi over 3. And then 270 degrees is always going to be 3 pi over 2. So that's 270 degrees. And then we continue. The last quadrant is going to be double the denominator, subtract 1. So double the denominator, subtract 1. Will be then 5. Oops. Because double 3 would be 6, and then subtract 1 would be 5. There you go. Double 4 would be 8, subtract 1 would be 7. And then double 6 would be 12, subtract 1, which would be 11. So that's how we figure out what the radian values are. And now I'm going to show you a trick to figuring out what the coordinates are. So coordinates are always labeled as x and y along the sides. The first coordinate is always your cos value. The second coordinate is always your sine value. So for this first one, we're going to do the quadrantal angles first. It's always going to be the using the radius. So the radius on a unit circle is always 1. So our first coordinate is going to be 1, 0, because the length is going to be 1, and then it's going to be, the height hasn't changed from the x-axis. Here the coordinates are 0 along the x and 1 for height. And then we have -1 and 0, and we have 0 and -1. Using the cast rule, what we'll do is we'll start filling out all these coordinates, the remaining coordinates for each of them. In the first quadrant, all the answers should be positive, so they should be positive in both sections. So a little trick is you start with 0 for the y. Do you guys see how 0 is the y coordinate right here? So I'm just going to outline that, 0. Then what you're going to do is you're going to write then 1 over 2, so that's one more than that. That'll be the square root of 1, which is 1. And 2 is always going to be the denominator for all of the pieces. The next one is going to be square root of 2 over 2. Next one's going to be square root of 3 over 2. So you're working all the way from 0 and counting up by 1, 2, 3, all the way to the y coordinate of the 1. And now you do the same thing, but you start with the 0 here. So do you guys see how this is starting with 0? You're going to start counting and say square root of 1 over 2, which is 1 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and square root of 3 over 2. So those are the coordinates for your first quadrant. Let's move on to the second quadrant. Our second quadrant when we are talking about our second quadrant, cos should be negative. So our first quadrant, our first coordinate, all of them should be negatives in that second quadrant. And the second coordinate, the sign should be positive. So again, we're starting from the 0. Do you guys see how 0 is the x? So you should go square root of 1 over 2, which is 1 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and square root of 3 over 2. And then now you start with the y coordinate. Do you guys see how the y coordinate is 0? You start counting up from there. So it'll be 1 over 2, because square root of 1 over 2, then square root of 2 over 2, then square root of 3 over 2. So it's a pattern of 1, 2, 3 at the top. The denominator of 2 is always there. Now we do the same thing for the other ones. Okay, so in this case, we have both the x and the y coordinate should be negative. So we start from the y coordinate being 0. So the y coordinate is 0, so we're going to start by counting 1 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and square root of 3 over 2. And then from our 0, which is this, do you guys see how the x is 0? We always count going towards that 1 value. So in this case, it's going to be then 1 over 2, which is square root of 1 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and square root of 3 over 2. So the pattern continues. And for our last quadrant, we should have that the y coordinate is negative because of the cast rule. Okay, so again, we're starting with the x being 0. So the x is 0, so it's 1 over square root of 2. Or sorry, it should be a square root of 1 over 2, which is 1 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, square root of 3 over 2. And then the y coordinate, you count up from there. So 1/2, which is square root of 1 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, and negative square root of 3 over 2. And that is our finished unit circle. Now, if you can recreate this, it makes it really easy to answer any question that follows. So we're going to use that unit circle here, that I will use this piece right here and just show you that. Here they just want the coordinates of 5 pi over 6. So you look at your unit circle, you look at 5 pi over 6, and then you just write the coordinates that match to it. Negative square root of 3 over 2, comma, 1/2. So I know it's a lot of work to fill out that unit circle, but once you do, it's just about writing what you see next to it. So it makes it so easy to answer any question after it. Okay, so that's our first answer. Our next one, the next one is they're saying, what coordinates do you see for negative 4 pi over 3? So what you want to do is find negative 4 pi over 3. So we're going, that just means that we're going in the opposite direction. So the only trick to this one is, guys, that you want to figure out what quadrant that is in, and then you just have to match it to the pi over 3 value. So when we're talking about 4 pi over 3, we just have to kind of flip the graph over. Normally, 4 pi over 3 is here, but they want the reflection of it. So the reflection of it would land you right here, guys. If you look at it, the reflection, if you flip it, would land you here, where the graph would be going around and then end up there, okay? Because normally we go counterclockwise and end up at 4 pi over 3, but since we're going the same distance but in the opposite direction, we need to go this way. One full rotation, which is then pi, and then pi over 3, an extra pi over 3, which takes you there. So then what you would do is write down those coordinates there. Okay, so your answer would be then, the matching coordinates to that would have been -1/2 and √3 over 2. Okay, so that's the only trick, is if you have the graph going in the opposite direction, you kind of just have to flip it. And here, they just want you to figure out what angle matches this, going from 0 to 2 pi. So we're going in the counterclockwise direction, which is what we're used to, so that's good. You just want to find that answer. So I'm looking for negative square root of 2 over 2 and negative square root of 2. So they're both negative, so that would be this guy right here. So there's that answer, and you just have to match it to the rotation angle. So our answer is then 5 pi over 4. And that's it. So